Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Nora was walking home from school. Pedro was walking alongside her, as usual. "So, are you coming out tonight?" "No. I don't think it'll work out." Marta said we need to eat the potatoes, Nora sighed. Ever since her father brought this woman into their home, Nora's life had turned into a living hell. Marta saw profit in everything, and of course, she found it. Her father worked in the city, 1 week there and 1 week at home. During the week he was home, it was easier, of course. But when he was away, it started. First, her stepmother decided to expand the garden and increase the number of animals on the farm. Her dad supported all her ideas, and Marta would say, "As soon as the farm starts making a profit, you can quit your job and work at home." "That would be nice, Marta. I miss you and my daughter so much." The woman smiled contentedly. As long as her dad was away, all the hard work fell on Nora's shoulders, but she didn't complain. She also wanted her dad to be home. Marta went to the market every 3 days. Nora didn't know how much money she made there, but apparently it was good because her dad quit his job after a year. Nora thought things would get easier, but they actually got much worse. On the first day when her father was free, Marta said at dinner, "Rodrigo, starting tomorrow, we're building a new barn. I've already ordered the materials." "Marta, why? This barn is only 5 years old." "Well, this one won't go anywhere, and we'll have an additional one." Her father just sighed. Lately, his wife's eyes were filled with numbers instead of love. He built the barn, then the shed, and the chicken coop. But Nora began to notice that her father smelled more and more like alcohol, and there was such sadness in his eyes. Marta would yell, argue, and even get into fights with everyone. Soon, nobody in the village even said hello to her, and she didn't care, to be honest. "I didn't take anything from anyone. I earned it all myself. Let those drunks and loafers gnash their teeth in envy." Pedro kicked a stone. "She's riding you hard. And now you won't even be able to get an honor roll." Nora waved her hand. "Why do I need that honor roll? Put it in my room and admire it? But you wanted to go to college. Who's going to let me into that college? Dad's on his knees every day, and the farm is huge," she sighed, and Pedro looked at her in amazement. "Nora, are you crazy? You're the best in our whole school. You wanted. How can this be?" Nora looked at the sky with longing. "It's nothing to worry about. I'll get through it. Most people do this, they get married, have children, and take care of the household. But it's a different time now. Pedro, leave it, okay? Tell me, how's your grandpa?" "He's doing better now. He limps a bit, but he's doing well." Nora smiled. A week ago, a terrible event shook the village. They had long been saying that wolves were getting too close to the village. They talked about it, but what good did it do? They had a forester. You could only catch him sober once a week. They hoped that nothing terrible would happen. They were wrong. One night, the wolves jumped over Pedro's neighbor's fence and tried to take their dog off the chain. The owner rushed out, along with the neighbors, and Pedro's grandpa, who was about 100 years old, didn't hesitate. He grabbed a rifle from the wall and rushed into the yard. He managed to grab the gun but shot himself in the leg instead of the wolf. Luckily, it was just a graze. But the noise scared the wolves away. As they say, there's both laughter and tears. The whole village helped treat Pedro's grandpa. Pedro only had his mother and grandpa, so they didn't have much income. Everyone brought something delicious or useful to Grandpa Roberto, who, you could say, sacrificed himself for their salvation. Only one family stayed out of it, and of course, it was Nora's family. Marta immediately said, "Well, if a person is a fool, it's forever. No need to jump around like a young man at that age." Her father was, as usual, under the weather, and Nora didn't even bother. No one ever listened to her anyway. Tell Grandpa to get well. I will. Listen, Nora, which field are you going to weed? The farthest one, beyond the village. Let me come and help you. No, Pedro, there's no need. Don't you have your own things to do? Nora said this, but she knew Pedro would come and help, and they could spend the saved time by the river, and that thought filled her with joy. Here she is. Why are you always hanging out with this Pedro? Look, if you'll get a bun in the oven, suddenly you'll find yourself outside. It would be one thing if he had some prospects, but he's just a lazy country boy, nobody needs him. You should be looking for someone more suitable. Nora didn't pay any attention to her. Her stepmother always met her with such conversations. If not Pedro, then it would be something else. No matter how Nora approached, accusations rained down on her from the moment she entered. Why are you wrinkling your nose? I carry your drunkard dad on my back, and you? Are you just lazing around? Don't forget, you have to weed the potatoes. I remember about your potatoes. Nora couldn't contain herself anymore. She wanted to scream and stomp her feet, but she knew that would only bring more tasks down on her head. What's wrong with her? And what do you eat with your dad? Or maybe you feed yourselves on air. Marta put her hands on her hips. Nora knew that a scandal was about to start, and it would be like a one-man show. To avoid that, she decided to skip lunch and head straight to the field. She quickly changed clothes while Marta was working herself into a frenzy and slipped out the door. She was already on her third row when Pedro appeared, not alone but with his grandpa. Good day, Nora. Hello, Grandpa Roberto. How's your leg? What could happen to it? It's just a habit now, it walks more than I do. And why are you out in this heat? Besides, what's the point of weeding it? It's going to be dug up soon. Nora sighed, and Grandpa grinned. He was a wise and kind man. I know. Don't say anything. Your harpy at the store is already throwing a fit. The sugar sand isn't the right color. She wants yellow, but they have white at the store. Pedro laughed. What difference does it make? I actually thought that yellow was bad. Well, I don't know. They say it's sweeter. Grandpa sat down on the grass, looked at his grandson. Well, why are you standing there? Go help the girl. Pedro stood up next to her, and they began to pull the grass vigorously. Soon, the smell of smoke was in the air. Grandpa lit a small fire at the edge of the field, dug up some potatoes, and pulled out cucumbers and tomatoes from his pocket. When there was less than half left, he called them over to have a snack. Nora had never eaten so deliciously. Of course, it was just potatoes, but it was so tasty. Overall, in the company of Grandpa Roberto and Pedro, it felt so homely, so good and peaceful. I knew your stepmother when she was just a girl, that's why she never liked me. She comes from a bad family. Her father killed her mother with his work, his own wife, and she's also put one man in the grave. But out of that big farm, she didn't inherit a thing. Her sister came for the funeral. It turns out, the house and everything that came with it belonged to her, but they didn't tell Marta about it. In the end, your stepmother lost everything, and then she attached herself to your father. Nora thoughtfully remarked. I wonder, does Dad know about this? Has he fallen so in love with Marta that he doesn't notice anything? After all, there was a time when they were dating. Can it really be that no one said anything to him? Well, I can't help you with that. I haven't seen your father in a long time. And even when I do see him, he's not in a condition to talk. He drinks heavily, doesn't he? He does. Well, that late guy used to drink too. Nora, as she was falling asleep that night, decided that as soon as she finished school, she would leave somewhere and take Dad with her. He would definitely quit drinking. She would make him, she would persuade him, and they would live happily. And let Marta manage this household on her own. Winter made things a bit easier. No need to work in the fields, no need to tend to the vegetable patches. Nora even went for walks sometimes. Pedro, as a faithful guardian, was always by her side. Honestly, sometimes she wished she could be without him, but where could she go? He gets offended right away. Overall, Nora increasingly thought that she just needed to get married successfully. Look at Agata, their neighbor, only 2 years older than Nora, and she got married in the nearby big village. Her husband is much older, but he treats her like a porcelain doll. Agata's mother said he even drives her to college and back in his car. Not only does he have a car, but he also allows Agata to study. Nora wished she could find someone like that. She would get married right away, no hesitation. As for Pedro, well, what about Pedro? He'll find a new object of affection for himself. On the other hand, Nora understood that such luck doesn't come often. Spring arrived. Ahead were exams, graduation, and what Nora didn't know. She couldn't talk about it with her father, and even less so with her stepmother. What would she say to her? And it was pretty clear. But something had to be done. And Nora made up her mind. Choosing a day when her stepmother was in a reasonably good mood, Nora sat down in front of her at the table. Marta. Marta looked up from some calculations. What? I need to talk to you. Her stepmother set aside the papers. Her face was serious. Well, let's talk. Nora could tell that her stepmother perfectly understood what the conversation would be about. Graduation is coming up. I need to submit documents somewhere. Marta didn't seem very friendly. Somewhere where? Well, to the place where I'll be studying further. Marta smirked. And will your daddy or I, your stranger aunt, be supporting you all this time? You understand that your immediate relative is of no help. Nora blushed. Of course, there was logic in her stepmother's words. Her father hadn't been lifting a finger for a long time. But what was Nora supposed to do? You understand, Nora, if you don't help with the household chores, I'll have to hire someone, and that means extra expenses. So, no matter how hard I try, I won't be able to allocate money for you. And, in general, if you wash your hands of it, there will be no need for you to come here. So, if you decide to study, you can forget about your family home. Nora was on the verge of tears. She had expected something like this, but it still hurt deeply. But everyone is going to study. You're not everyone. Your situation is completely different, or am I wrong? That's it. I believe I've explained everything to you clearly. Nora's stepmother got up and left, leaving Nora in tears. Everything was just as she had thought. She would wither away in this village. For several days, Nora felt out of sorts. She had no mood for anything. She even decided not to attend the graduation ceremony. Pedro irritated her so much that she couldn't bear it. One day, she came home from school, sat down on a bench in the yard, and just sat there. She heard a rustling from the barn. Weird, Marta went to the market this morning. In general, Marta had recently passed her driver's license test and bought herself a green car, so she started going to town much more often. Who could it be? Nora cautiously stood up. She wanted to approach the door, but it opened by itself. A disheveled head appeared from inside. It was her father. He was clearly heavily intoxicated. Nora sighed bitterly. Oh, Nora? Where is this harpy? Nora was filled with such anger that tears burst from her eyes. No. And who cares who's here and who's not? You don't care about anyone except yourself. Dad, why do you hate me so much? You handed me over to a stranger aunt, and you're just drinking every day, not thinking about your daughter. Nora, what's gotten into you? What are you saying? What am I saying? Do you know that everyone is going to continue their education after school, and your daughter will keep cleaning cow dung because Dad doesn't want to do anything? It's more interesting for him to drink every day than to think about his daughter. Nora, wait. Wait, don't cry. But Nora had already rushed into the house. Rodrigo sat down on the bench where his daughter had just been and stared ahead. Does your head hurt from all these thoughts? He looked up and saw his father, Roberto, at the gate. Hi, Grandpa. It does. I just can't understand anything. Is your harpy home? Rodrigo waved his hand. No, she's gone to the city. Grandpa Roberto walked into the yard and sat down next to him. What are you doing, Rodrigo? Pedro told me your girl isn't allowed to study. Why isn't she allowed? Well, you'd have to support her for another year. Do we not have the money? Maybe she does, but I doubt you do. I see. What do you mean by I see? Rodrigo hung his head. He cursed himself for coming out of the barn at this very moment. In the evening, Nora heard her father and Marta talking in the kitchen. They were actually having a conversation, not shouting and arguing as they had done for the past couple of years. Nora tried to eavesdrop, but the words were indistinct. About half an hour later, Marta came to her. Nora, come over to us. Nora went out. Her father was sitting at the table, looking grim. Marta pointed to a chair. Sit down. Nora sat down, looking at her father in astonishment. Apparently, he was sober. Her stepmother began to speak. Well, Nora, your dad swears that he won't take another drop. He says he'll work for 3 if it means you'll continue your education. I can agree to that, but on one condition: if your dad ever gets drunk even once, you quit your studies immediately. Nora agreed to everything. She understood that the most important thing was to get out of here. After that, she would figure things out. Maybe she would find a job. Maybe something else. Nora was already daydreaming about a completely different life. Truth be told, she had no idea what it was like to live in the city. Honestly, she couldn't even fathom what she would do there all day long, but she wanted it so badly. Several years passed. Nora had just received her nursing diploma and was about to start working. She had a boyfriend whom she planned to marry in the future. He might not have been the most successful guy, but he was from the city, and he had an apartment. True, he still lived with his mother, but that didn't bother Nora. She was determined to be a good daughter-in-law. She hardly communicated with her father and stepmother. She visited them once every 6 months and tried to leave as soon as possible. Nora, you're needed on the phone. The door of her dorm room opened, and Nora saw the dorm supervisor standing there. Strange. She usually never invites anyone to the phone. Nora went out. First, she walked, then she ran. The phone receiver was lying on the table. Hello? Hello? Nora, this is Raphael from the village council. Yes, Raphael, I'm listening. There's been an accident. In short, Nora, your family. They were on their way to the city. Something must have happened to the car. They veered off the road and hit a tree. You need to come here, there are matters to attend to. Nora dropped the receiver, then slowly sank to the floor. How can this be? How can this be? Someone handed her a glass of water, and someone helped her sit on a chair. Nora sat at the head of the table. Neighbors gathered around the table, some from the village. What a tragedy. They weren't old. They had their whole lives ahead of them. Yeah. Rodrigo finally got his act together, became a real man. Even Marta settled down a bit when he stopped drinking. Well, a woman needs something more, a real husband, not just a body. Nora heard through a haze, but in her head, one thought was pounding: what do I do now? When everyone dispersed, Nora started washing the dishes. Someone knocked on the door. Who is it? Pedro was standing at the threshold. Nora hadn't seen him in a very long time, probably not since he went into the army. Hello, Nora. Hello, Pedro. I almost didn't recognize you. And that was the truth. Pedro had grown up, transformed from a skinny and awkward boy into a tall, strong man. Pedro, where have you been? Well, I came to see my mother, and she said you were here. I decided to drop by. Come in. Pedro took a seat at the table, glanced around the kitchen. Nora. Please accept my condolences. Thank you, Pedro. She finished cleaning, looked at him. Would you like a drink? Sure, let's. We'll sit, commemorate Uncle Rodrigo and his Marta. After all, he was a living person. Nora placed sandwiches, a bottle, and a glass in front of him. And you? Aren't you having one yourself? I don't drink, Pedro. That's not right. They're not strangers to you. Have a little, and you'll feel better right away. I promise you. Nora sighed and poured another shot. She had tried drinking with the girls in the dormitory before, but it hadn't worked out. Nora found it unpleasant and distasteful. Don't sniff it. Drink it in one gulp, as much as you can. And don't breathe, immediately follow it with some juice. Nora did just that. The aftertaste wasn't great, but it wasn't as bad as before. Within a few minutes, she felt her muscles relaxing, and things seemed lighter. Well, how about another one? Sure, let's. Nora woke up with a pounding headache. She couldn't remember going to bed last night. She turned her head and was surprised to see Pedro sleeping next to her. Damn. Unbelievable at a funeral. She must have gone insane. The worst part was that she didn't remember anything. Pedro. He stirred and turned toward her. Nora, you're quite something, I must say. You should drink more often. Pedro, please leave immediately before the village wakes up. Come on, what's the matter? We're adults. Leave. I'm asking you. Nora didn't know what to say and blurted out. I have a fiancé. Pedro's eyes narrowed. A fiancé, you say? Why did you jump into bed with me then? Oh, right, I jumped into yours. Okay. I'll leave now. Pedro got dressed in 2 seconds and left, and Nora burst into tears. She hadn't wanted any of this. In fact, she hadn't wanted anything at all. After her childhood friend left, she had felt a lingering sense of guilt, as if she had wronged someone undeservedly. In the morning, Nora visited the cemetery, spent some time at the fresh graves, cried, and on her way back, she saw Grandpa Roberto. He was obviously waiting for her. Hello, Nora. Hello, Grandpa Roberto. I wanted to talk to you, Nora. The young woman blushed deeply. I've become quite old. I can't sleep anymore, you know, not a wink. Well, today I didn't sleep either. You know, Pedro, he's my everything. I saw him jump out of your room, and today he was planning to go to the city. His mother's crying, and my heart is breaking. He promised to stay. What happened to you too, Nora? What could Nora tell him? She thought about how if she told everything, all her dreams of going to the city, of city life in general, would crumble. She loved the village, but not so much that she wouldn't even try to leave. On the other hand, Pedro, he had become so. Her city suitor was far behind. Grandpa Roberto, nothing happened, really. We were just sitting there and talking. Nora walked past the old man and continued down the path. She could feel his gaze burning into her back, but she didn't turn around. In 3 days, she was planning to leave. She had briefly seen that Pedro was still here, which meant he had calmed down. Well, that was good. As much as she might like him, she didn't want to tie her life to him. She knew him, practically from birth. What could be interesting about him? She had already packed her things and double-checked everything to make sure nothing was left on, and her neighbor had agreed to look after the house. Nora had promised the young girl a reward for this. The neighbor was Agata's mother, the same Agata whom Nora had once envied. She sighed. Don't worry, Nora. I'll take care of everything, and Agata will help. It's not easy for us right now. Agata? Is Agata here? She's here, Nora. Where else would she be? But she was married. You said everything was fine. Aunt Zoe waved her hand dismissively. What was I supposed to say? That she got married on a whim, and it's rare for her to go a day without being battered? She endured it as long as she could, and then came to me with the child in her arms. We barely managed to get her away from that monster. Nora was taken aback. For her, Agata had been an example for so many years, and now this revelation. The neighbor left, and Nora sat down for a while. Nora! Nora! It was Pedro's voice. Something had happened? She rushed out onto the street. Pedro was almost at the door. Nora, Grandpa is not well. Please help, you're a medic. Our paramedic has been drunk for 3 days. Nora dashed into the house without even bothering to lock the door, grabbed her medical kit from her bag, which she always carried with her, and ran. Pedro was running alongside her and explaining. He's been looking pale and unwell since the morning, breathing heavily. Then, at lunch, he got up from the couch and sat down again. I asked, "What's wrong?" But he just waved me off. But now he's really in bad shape. Nora, please help. She stopped abruptly, and Pedro bumped into her. Pedro, I'll do everything I can, but you have to understand something. How old is Grandpa Roberto? He's 94. Pedro sighed as if he were about to cry. Nora understood that Grandpa Roberto was indeed in very bad shape. She sat down next to him and rummaged through her medical kit. An hour later, he was feeling much better. Grandpa Roberto, you need to go to the hospital. I'm not going anywhere. I won't have it. I'll die at home. Pedro exclaimed indignantly. Grandpa, what do you mean die? You need to get those thoughts out of your head. Grandpa smiled and looked at his grandson. And what do you think, that life begins at 94? No, my boy. Everyone has their time, and trying to outsmart fate is foolish. I've had a good, long life. Look at the men in our village who have reached 70, they're all gone. Nora and Pedro stepped outside. Pedro, I don't know what to do. Honestly, Grandpa Roberto's condition is not very good. He won't go to the hospital. I know my grandpa. Nora looked at Pedro, realizing how much his grandpa meant to him. But you said the paramedic is drinking, and I need to go back to the... Then go. Pedro stubbornly avoided looking at her. Pedro, I really need to go. Nobody will be waiting for me at my new job. I'm not keeping you, and I understand everything. Thanks for coming. Do you want me to walk you out? Nora shook her head. No, it's not necessary. Then go. The bus leaves in an hour. Nora walked down the street. After a minute, she turned around, but Pedro was already gone from the yard. For the first time in her life, she wanted to stay in the village. She wandered around the yard, scratched the dog behind the ear, and then sat on a bench. What should she do? She just sat there. She checked her watch, the bus had already left. No problem, she would go tomorrow. She would talk to Elio and discuss the prospects for the village. At least there would be no financial problems here. Look at her property. Nora didn't even know if she was making the right decision, but she needed to make a choice. She went to bed with a heavy heart. In the morning, she decided to leave after all. What could she do here? When the bus approached, she got on and saw Pedro running to her house and then back again. She closed her eyes. Grandpa Roberto had passed away. Nora had learned about it from Luz, a girl from their village, whom she had met by chance in the city. She tried not to blame herself. She knew that there was no way out for Grandpa Roberto, but she understood what Pedro must be thinking. A week later, she went to see Elio. It was strange that he hadn't contacted her during this time. His mother answered the door, and Nora hadn't seen her before. She was immediately intimidated. Hello. Is Elio home? And who are you? You're not Nora, are you? I am Nora. Nora tried to smile. You should stop coming here, Nora. Elio has found a nice girl, from the city, educated. She was taken aback. What do you mean found? He knew I was going to a funeral. So what if he knew? And what can you offer a family? You haven't even started working properly yet. Your parents can't help you now. Nora felt like she couldn't breathe from such accusations. Then she said, well, maybe nothing that you dream of. Except, perhaps, a house worth more than your apartment or a farm that will bring in a significant sum. But you're probably not interested in that anymore. Goodbye. She ran downstairs. Tears streamed from her eyes. The steps merged into one. That same day, Nora threw all her things into a suitcase and prepared to leave for the village. Damn it all! People somehow live in the village, especially with her profession. In the evening, someone quietly knocked on her door. Yes? Elio stood at the doorstep. Hello, Nora. She leaned back in her chair, looking at him with interest. My God, what had she seen in him? Slim, tall, wearing glasses. His hands were pale, and his forehead was constantly sweating. Oh, your mom said about how close you are to lose a wealthy bride. Why would you say that? I just missed you. Missed me. Well, that's good. I said a few things to your mom. It's okay. My mom has a difficult character. Please forgive her. For all the time they had known each other, Elio had never spoken to her so affectionately. Nora suddenly felt deeply hurt. Was she really so worthless that she could only be loved for her inheritance? Elio, you see, there's something. Nora looked at Elio, who had comfortably settled on her bed, and smiled. You are a very good person. I need you so much. I've inherited a lot of debt. Elio sat up abruptly. What kind of debt? And Nora couldn't stop herself. Well, what kind? Regular debt. That's strange. What's strange, Elio? Oh, nothing. I just remembered. I urgently need to go somewhere. Let's meet tomorrow. He quickly kissed Nora on the cheek and disappeared. There was no other way to describe it because Elio never stopped. He was more like a ghost. Nora collapsed onto her bed and burst into tears. What was wrong with her? Why? She was reasonably attractive and well-educated. She fell asleep while pondering these thoughts. In the morning, after packing her things, she got on the bus. When she arrived and looked around, she thought, isn't this place beautiful? Construction was in full swing on the edge of the village. She had heard that they were building a new community center. It would be called the House of Culture. Living here was easy, and she should never forget the saying, dry bread at home is better than roast meat abroad. She entered her yard, cast a fresh look around, and thought, this is good. This is home. Pedro hadn't seen Nora. She deliberately walked past their house several times, but he either didn't notice or didn't want to come out. Probably the latter. Well, that was fine. He would calm down and understand, and they would make up. With each passing day, Nora realized more that she wanted to be with him. She wanted to live together, have children. 2 weeks passed. During that time, Nora sold most of her farm. She kept some things for herself and also became good friends with Agata. They hadn't really interacted much before because Agata was older. Nora didn't recognize her at first, with her thin figure and somewhat contemplative demeanor, but they started talking. One evening, when they were having coffee, Agata asked, Nora, what are your thoughts about work? I don't know. I have to go to the director. Let's see what he offers me. What about the medical center? Well, there's a medic there. Agata laughed. Medic? Come on. He's no medic. Well, you know, it's awkward to confront someone like that. Stop it. Think about people, not that drunkard. Nora thought about it all night. And indeed, she realized. Nobody thought about her. Why should she think about others? Especially since Agata was right. In the morning, she took her documents and headed to the office. Raphael used to be called the chairman, but now he was the director. Well, what's the difference? Just like before, he handled all the village's matters. Oh, Nora. They told me you came back, and I was wondering if it was for good. Or is it just for business? It's for business, Raphael. I'm here about work. The director rubbed his hands together. So, you're back for good? You won't run away? Well, I don't have any plans to leave for now. He looked at her attentively. You know, I'm going to hire you for work now, and then. Stop it, Raphael. I'm not 18 anymore. I said I'm staying here. After an hour of negotiations, when the current medic was called in, reeking of alcohol, and he thanked her profusely for relieving him of such responsibility, Nora received the keys to the medical center. She looked at them with surprise. Well, now she was a real person. Straight from the office, she went to the medical center. The grass was taller than the fence, and the narrow path led to the door. Well, the previous medic hadn't really put in much effort. Nora looked around and rolled up her sleeves. Now she could do what was truly needed. No one had shown up at the medical center for at least 2 weeks. Dust was everywhere, and the few instruments that were there were haphazardly scattered on the table. 2 hours later, the door opened, and Nora heard Agata's voice. Nora, are you here? Nora peeked out. I'm here, where else would I be? Agata burst into laughter. Oh, I can't. Have you seen yourself? Nora wiped a streak on her cheek, fixed her hair, which promptly sprang back into wild disarray. Come on, neighbor, help me instead of laughing pointlessly. Work with both of them went much faster. By evening, the interiors of the medical center were shining brightly. They walked out, and Nora sighed tiredly. Tomorrow I'll have to mow all this beauty myself. Listen, ask your mother if it's okay to plant some flowers now. All right, I'll ask. But as for mowing, we need to ask the men. Oh, I can handle it myself. I don't want to ask anyone. The next morning, Nora got up early, milked the cow, and sent her out with the herd. Immediately, the village women surrounded her. Nora, is it true that you're our medic now? She smiled. It's true. So, are you going to work every day? And will you even come when needed? Exactly. Today I'm tidying up, and starting from tomorrow, I'll be at your service. Can you believe it? Not long ago, she was a young girl running around, and now she's a doctor. Unbelievable. Nora enjoyed hearing this. She even felt proud of herself. Indeed, what did she need in that city? She had everything she needed here, a huge house, a decent financial cushion, and a job. If she did her job well, she would earn respect. And maybe Pedro would hear about how she had changed and come back on his own. Nora knew they were both adults now, and they could have a conversation, but she knew Pedro well. He wouldn't be the first to initiate it, and she certainly wouldn't. On the first day when the medical center was supposed to be operational, Nora, not even reaching it yet, saw a crowd of elderly women. Wow! She understood perfectly well that today she would have an exam. There was no other way to describe it. And, of course, everyone got sick at once. Agata, who was walking alongside her, she was taking her daughter to daycare, whistled. Well, my friend, you won't finish sorting this out by tomorrow. Nora smiled. Don't worry, I'll manage. By lunchtime, the line had significantly thinned out. Nora felt her stomach growling. One of her patients noticed it too. When the consultation was over, Nora walked out and said, All right, ladies, our doctor's stomach is rumbling already. Let the girl have at least some coffee. Everyone agreed without complaints, and Nora was very grateful to them for that. After half an hour, feeling a bit rested and cheerful, she peered into the corridor. So, who's next in line for health check? By evening, all the elderly ladies had dispersed happily to their homes. The director popped in, inquiring if she needed anything. Nora handed him a list with a sweet smile and added, "But everything is very urgent." The director stared in bewilderment at the double-sided sheet filled with writing from all sides. "Is this really all of it?" "Yep. Everything. Nothing can be missed." He scratched his head. "Oh, did I perhaps overdo it by appointing you in Jorge's place?" Nora remained silent. Raphael sighed and left. She hadn't seen Pedro at all. Later, Agata told her that he was currently working in the city, cutting down trees in the woods. He only came home on Saturdays. He would wash up, sleep, and then head back to the woods. But going to his house was out of the question. 2 months had passed since Nora started working. The elderly ladies were satisfied, and that was the most important thing. At their age, they needed attention more than medicine. Occasionally, someone younger would show up. Nora urgently sent 2 of them to the hospital, one with appendicitis and the other with what seemed like kidney stones. Well, Nora couldn't be 100% sure without tests, but it really looked like kidney stones. As it turned out, she had made the right call. The hospital said that a few more days, and it would have been too late to treat them. The usual workday was coming to an end. The weather outside was bad, so there weren't many patients today. Nora was about to close the medicine cabinet when the door slammed and someone shouted, "Doctor! Is there a doctor here?" Nora rushed out of her office. "Pedro!" Nora almost lost consciousness. Pedro was in such a state. "Girl, here," one of the men said fearfully. "Over here, on the couch." They laid Pedro on the couch. "Someone, quickly fetch Jorge. If he's sober, tell him to run here." The younger man nodded and sprinted out of the medical center. Nora was examining Pedro, several head wounds. It seemed his skull was intact. The wounds were superficial, his arm hung limp, and there was a gash on his shoulder. "Girl, listen, we need to avoid going to the city if possible. The forest is the only place our men can earn money. If all this gets out, we'll lose all the work." "Are you out of your mind? A person might die." "I understand. I'm saying, if it's possible." Fortunately for Nora, Jorge was sober. He entered the room quickly, glanced at Pedro, and said, What are we going to do?" "Let's start with his head." An hour later, Nora had put in the last stitch. Jorge approvingly croaked, "Nice work." Pedro opened his eyes. "Nora? Lie still, don't move." He smiled and closed his eyes. His arm turned out to be dislocated. That's where Jorge came in handy. Pedro cried out and lost consciousness completely. "Don't worry. It'll hurt a bit, and that's it." Pedro's mother burst into the medical center. She rushed at the man who had asked Nora not to send Pedro to the city. "Are you satisfied? You sit here. You'd better have vanished into thin air, you scoundrel." The man turned away from her claps and said nothing. As Jorge explained, he had been the foreman with the loggers. "Calm down. It's not like you don't know your own son. He's the first to jump in everywhere." A woman peered into Nora's room. "Nora? Don't worry. Everything will be fine. I'll stay with him until morning." "I'll stay with you." "No need. I can handle it." Pedro woke up in the middle of the night, glanced around the medical center with a groggy look, and stopped his gaze on Nora, who was sleeping at the table. "Nora." She sat up abruptly. "Pedro. How are you feeling?" "Who knows? Not very good." "You're lucky, the head wound was only superficial." "Yeah, lucky, all right." In the morning, they transported Pedro back home. Liana, his mother, thanked Nora profusely and then said, "Nora, will you come over?" "Of course. I'll come every day. change the bandages, and tend to patient. Later, we'll need to remove the stitches. Nora visited Pedro's home every day, but Pedro, the better he felt physically, the gloomier he appeared. One day he said, "Nora, you don't have to come anymore." But, Pedro, it's not necessary. She understood he was not talking about her looking after him as a doctor, but about their relationship. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Are you sure?" "Very. You said yourself you wanted to marry someone from the city. So, I won't interfere." Nora wanted to say something, but Pedro cut her off. "Besides, I'm getting married soon. I have a fiancé." Nora stormed out of the house as if scalded. She ran and cried all the way home. At home, she calmed down a bit. Pedro must be losing his mind. Anybody in his place would be going crazy. It's okay, he'll calm down a bit, and then they'll talk. Time passed, and Pedro didn't make any moves. Later, she found out that he had gone back to the woods again. Nora was furious. "Oh, is that so? Well, forget you." Manuel had been pursuing her for a while now, a guy from the neighboring village. She'll show Pedro. A day later, Manuel appeared, placed a chocolate bar in front of her, sat silently for a while, and then said, "Tomorrow's a day off. Some artists are performing at the club. Maybe we could go?" He said it with a sense of hopelessness, convinced in advance that she would refuse. "Sure, let's go." Manuel perked up. "Really?" "Yes." Nora didn't feel anything particular towards Manuel, no disgust, no affection. He was just a person, that's all. Pedro was the only thing on her mind. Did he really tell her the truth? No, that couldn't be true. He probably just wanted to upset her. Nora was absolutely sure of that. Well, Pedro, she knew how to get under his skin as well. Of course, she understood that this was all child's play, but there was nothing she could do about it. It wasn't fair to Manuel, even though she hadn't promised him anything, and he hadn't mentioned anything of the sort. He invited her to the club, and she agreed. Manuel knocked on her door exactly on time. Nora wasn't quite ready yet. "Yes, come in." He entered and looked around. Wow, what a place! It's even bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Nora laughed. That's illogical. A house can't be bigger on the inside than on the outside. Manuel smiled, touched the large television. Do you have a whole farm here? Yes. What's a village without a farm? And is it a big one? Not really. Just a few piglets, a cow, and some odds and ends. The man looked at her in admiration. And how do you manage everything? Nora laughed. Is this even considered a farm? It's just some small stuff. We used to have a real farm before, you could stretch your legs there. But you're probably familiar with it. No, where is it? Oh, right. You're not from our village. Manuel sighed. That's right. My mother managed to give birth to me in this backwater. Only 4 houses left, and there's no road. Well, why don't you sell the house and move closer? The man waved his hand. I've tried. You know what Raphael tells me? He says that there's only one worker in my family. Providing housing is not cost-effective. It's better to give it to a family where several people work and who have children. Nora shook her head. On the one hand, she could understand the director. On the other hand, what were people like him supposed to do? Half an hour later, they headed toward the club. There seemed to be an endless crowd. People from all the neighboring villages had come to see the city artists. She spotted Pedro. Her heart sank. Pedro had noticed her and immediately disappeared. Nora kept turning her head, but she couldn't see where he had gone. It was only when they were already taking their seats that she spotted him. Pedro entered the hall, holding the hand of some girl. Nora suddenly felt a chill. Did he really not lie? Does he really have a fiancé? Her mood was ruined. She didn't see who was performing or what songs they were singing. She just sat there, staring ahead, clapping when others clapped. After the concert, the dancing began. She saw Pedro dancing with that same girl. One thought pounded in her head: she needed to talk to him. To talk and tell him that they were both wrong. Pedro held the girl very close to him, and she screamed and then laughed. Nora felt sick. She grabbed Manuel's hand and dragged him onto the dance floor. I don't know how to dance, Nora. You'll learn. She pressed herself against him and gradually moved closer to where Pedro was dancing. He noticed her, stared for a long time, and then pressed his lips to the girl's. Nora had no choice but to kiss Manuel right then and there. The young man's eyes nearly popped out of his head in surprise, but Pedro himself disappeared. No matter how much Nora looked for him, she never saw him again. Manuel, I'm going home. Nora, what about us? I thought that there is no us. I'm tired and want to sleep. Can I at least walk you home? Please? No, you can't. I just want to be alone, okay? Nora understood that she had been unnecessarily rude to the guy, but she couldn't help herself. She trudged down the street. It was quiet, peaceful. Occasionally, someone's dog would start barking, but it would quickly quiet down. Nora approached her gate, sighed, pushed it, and found herself in strong arms. Well, got caught, little bird? Pedro? You scared me. You haven't seen anything yet. Pedro reeked of alcohol. Have you been drinking? Go home. No way. How can I go home when you've been wiggling your backside all evening? Pedro, what's gotten into you? He held her and wouldn't let go. Then he looked at her. Missed me, Nora? Nora felt scared. Pedro, please, go home. But he lifted her in his arms and carried her to the barn. Pedro, this isn't necessary, please. Don't scream so loudly. It's not proper for a well-respected nurse to be caught in an indecent act, and we are about to engage in some very indecent activities. Pedro. She resisted as much as she could, but Pedro wasn't rough. He was just insistent. By morning, Pedro silently got up and slipped out of the barn, but he didn't say a word to her. Nora had hoped that now, finally, they would talk and resolve everything. She could see that he cared about her, but for some reason, he had decided something silly for himself. Well, nothing could be done about it. She would definitely go to his place and talk to him. The whole day, Nora lay on the couch. She decided to have a real day off. She rested, got up in the evening, made a salad, and then collapsed in front of the TV. On the next day, almost immediately after Nora arrived at work, Manuel appeared. In his hands, he had a bouquet of asters that grew in every yard, and his face bore a triumphant expression. Nora, how I missed you. Nora raised an eyebrow in surprise, then remembered how she had behaved with Manuel and blushed. It wasn't his fault, really. It was her and Pedro who had dragged him into their game. Manuel, I'm very flattered, but... No buts. My mom is waiting for us for dinner tonight. The director allowed me to take the car after work. Nora was just gathering her strength to respond when the door burst open. Nora? Agata was standing in the doorway. Nora, Liana isn't feeling well. Pedro came for Mom. Hurry. Nora grabbed her little bag and threw it to Manuel. Later. You see for yourself. They almost ran to Pedro's house. Along the way, Agata explained. In the morning, Pedro was leaving, and he and his mother were having a heated argument by the gate about something, and then Pedro jumped into his car and drove off. Where? Nora stopped. Where do you think? To work somewhere. I don't know where, but it seems like he'll be gone for a while because he had a suitcase and a backpack with him. And Aunt Liana just sat on the bench, her head bowed. Mom thought she was crying, but she was just sitting and sitting. So she ran over to her, but her eyes were closed and her lips were white. Nora walked almost on autopilot. How could this happen? How? He just up and left? And what about her? How was she supposed to deal with this? She refused to believe that Pedro had run away again. It couldn't go on like this forever. Liana was indeed in bad shape. She was trying to say something, but Nora could already see that one side of her face was distorted. She administered an injection, then another. Agata, run to my place, call an ambulance. Tell them it's a stroke. Say that I asked you to call. There's a number by the phone. Agata looked at Liana with fear and rushed off to the medical station. Manuel, who had been waiting outside, bewildered, asked, "What's going on? Where is Nora?" "What Nora?" "A person is dying." Agata waved him off and rushed into the building. By the time they took the woman away, there was already a crowd gathered at her house. "Agata, please look after my animals for today. I'll be back." "Of course, Nora, no problem." "How will you get back?" "I'll figure something out." Raphael approached her. "Go, Nora. When you're done there, call me. I'll send a car for you." "Thank you very much, Raphael." Nora stayed in the city until the early morning. Closer to dawn, the woman started to feel a little better. "Well, you're a medic yourself. You should understand that it's too early to make any predictions. Let's hope she's a strong countrywoman." Nora checked her watch. She could catch the first bus back to the village, get some sleep on the way, and be back in a few hours. The first person she saw when she got off the bus was Elio. Nora had expected to see him here the least. "Nora, I've been waiting for you here for who knows how long." "Elio, what are you even doing here?" "Well, you disappeared, so I thought." "Wait, weren't you supposed to marry a city girl who's way better than me?" He made a disgruntled face. "Stop it, it doesn't suit you. The wedding didn't happen because... Anyway, it doesn't matter. You act as if you're not glad to see me. And why should I be?" Elio squinted. "You've changed so quickly." "Elio, whether I've changed or not, what's the difference? You definitely have no business here." She wanted to walk past him, but Elio walked alongside her. "Nora, I understand you. You're hurt, you're angry." "That's right. I agree with you, but I believe that we know each other well enough to overlook these petty arguments." "Elio, don't you understand at all?" Nora stopped. "Do you really think you have any reason to be here?" "Nora." "What? I thought we could at least talk. Will you offer me a coffee?" "No. I won't offer you coffee. Nora, I have difficulties. And? I need both moral and financial support." Nora glared at him angrily. "I see. And wouldn't you and your mommy just go?" Elio stopped smiling. He was about to say something when a car pulled up next to them. "Nora, any problems?" She turned around. Manuel stepped out of the car. "Manuel, yes, here he's stuck and won't let go." Manuel quickly stood between her and Elio. "Young man, didn't she explain it to you? Go where you were going." Elio spat. "You'll regret it, cow." Elio turned and left, and Nora was left breathless with indignation. Manuel turned to her. "You're not a cow at all. You're very beautiful. Nora, when are we going to meet my mother?" "Good Lord, Manuel, not you too." Nora turned around and rushed to the house. Manuel watched her for a long time. 3 days later, Nora went to the hospital again. Zoe brought honey and a piece of homemade cheese. "Give my regards to Liana. Tell her to get better and not to overdo." "All right, Zoe, I'll pass it on." Nora pushed open the door to the ward and froze. Pedro was sitting by his mother's bedside, feeding her carefully with a spoon. "Hello." He glanced briefly at her, nodded, and continued feeding the woman. Nora approached, placing everything she had brought on the table. "How are you here?" Liana smiled. It didn't come out very well, but it was clear that she was smiling. "Zoe sent you some treats and said to get well soon." She nodded. Pedro left the room. Nora sat for a while and then got up. She saw him immediately and approached. "Thank you, Nora, for saving my mom. You didn't save my grandpa, you just left, but my mom is alive. Pedro, your grandpa couldn't have been saved. Trust me. You didn't even try. You just left. Pedro, why can't you understand? How can I explain it to you? Even if he had been taken to the hospital, he still wouldn't have recovered. I don't want to hear it. Pedro. Nora, I took 2 days off. I'm leaving again tomorrow, and I won't be back for a long time. Pedro, what about me? What does that have to do with you? Well, I love you." Pedro smirked unkindly. "Well, you'll love someone else. You're quick at that, aren't you?" Pedro. "Go, Nora. I'm leaving tomorrow, and I don't care what you're telling me right now. I don't believe you, and honestly, I don't want to." Pedro got up and went into the hospital. "Pedro, stop." He didn't turn around. As she rode home, not a single tear came to her eyes. She got off the bus, went to her house, and sighed. Someone was sitting on the bench by the gate. Nora sighed again. It was Manuel, and it seemed his mother was with him. Well, it seemed like fate. Nora put on a smile. "Nora." Manuel rushed towards her. "Nora, forgive us, but you never have time. As they say, if Muhammad won't go to the mountain." An elderly woman stood up. Estefania. Nora extended her hand in response. "Nora, please come in." As they walked through the courtyard, Estefania scrutinized everything. Not just scrutinized, but evaluated, as if she were assigning a value to everything all at once. When they entered the house, the woman gasped. "These are quite the accommodations. Not everyone in the city has something like this." Nora smiled. "Well, there's not much room to spread out in the city. Apartments there are small." "You're right, Nora. What's there in the city when you can live like a human in the village?" Nora took off her jacket and started setting the table. Her mood was off, to say the least. And then she remembered that one of the patients had brought her a pretty bottle. He said his relatives brought it from the south. She remembered how it relaxed her, and she quickly found it. Placing it in the middle of the set table, she looked at Estefania, who was inspecting the house. "Let's sit down at the table. Everyone's hungry." The woman glanced at the table. "Oh, so much food. Eat, don't be shy." "What's this?" "This is cognac, it came from the south." "Cognac? I've never tried it before." For nearly an hour, they talked about nothing in particular, the weather, nature, and the failed potato crop. Then, when the cognac had clearly taken its toll, Estefania brought up the topic she had in mind. "Nora, do you realize that you're not getting any younger? In the village, you're practically an old maid. It just so happens that my Manuel is almost 30 and he's been avoiding relationships." Estefania pounded her fist on the table. Manuel jumped up. "Mom, please, calm down." Nora watched the woman with interest, while Manuel didn't know where to hide. Estefania continued. "Why are you both hanging around? Especially since my Manuel is head over heels in love with you, and you're a smart girl. Good job, your own house, your own farm. Nowadays, it's hard to find someone so independent. In short, you need to get married." She said it as if she had just settled the matter. Manuel sat there, as red as a lobster, while Nora poured drinks for everyone and said, "Well, if it's necessary, then let's get married." Estefania waved her hand and promptly started snoring. Manuel and Nora moved her to the couch. Manuel kept apologizing. Nora, I'm so sorry. My mom never drinks, only a little homemade liqueur before bed, a teaspoon, but I don't know what came over her. It's all right. Let her rest. Well, you can't drive. So we can't make her walk so many kilometers in the middle of the night. Yeah, I didn't think it through. Manuel looked at her somewhat embarrassed. Nora, what did you mean by saying we should get married? Well, I said what I said. You do want to marry me, don't you? Very much. Tell me honestly, is it because of the house or not? No, Nora, what are you thinking? It's my mom, she's just looking for advantages in everything. Well, that's it then. Start preparing for the wedding. Nora put the dishes in the sink, stood there for a moment, thought, and decided she would wash them in the morning. Well, what are you waiting for? Let's go. Where? Where else? To bed. Just like that? Well, if you want, you can wait for the wedding. She went into the room, and Manuel, as if suddenly realizing something, rushed after her. In reality, Nora knew that she was doing all of this out of resentment towards Pedro. But she told herself, it's not a big deal. I'll endure it and learn to love him. Or as Pedro said, you fall in love quickly, right? Soon, Manuel appeared. Of course, even with closed eyes, it was clear that it wasn't Pedro. Manuel turned away and started snoring, while she lay there, staring at the ceiling, tears silently streaming down her face. In the morning, Nora woke up before everyone else. She quietly washed the dishes and made pancakes. As she was getting dressed, Estefania woke up. Oh, Nora, how could I oversleep like that? And where are you off to? I'm going to work. You all should have breakfast. And when you go home, drop the keys off at the medical office. All right. Whether it was intentional or just a coincidence, Estefania showed up at the medical office precisely when it was crowded. Oh, Estefania, are you feeling unwell? One of the elderly ladies greeted her. Well, you could say so. I brought the keys to the future bride's house. What future bride are you talking about? What do you mean? Nora, of course. You're lying. So that our Nora would marry your Manuel. Why would I lie? If you don't believe me, here are the keys. Estefania proudly walked to the office door, opened it. Nora, take the keys. I checked everything and turned everything off. All right, Estefania. Thank you. The elderly woman closed the door and looked at everyone present. In your face. And by the way, why is my Manuel so bad that he isn't a match for Nora? The same old lady burst into laughter. No, why would he be bad? He's not bad, just very lazy. Well, your whole family is like that, really. Estefania glared at them and headed for the exit, stopping by the door. We'll see who has the last laugh. And she left. The elderly ladies continued to gossip for a while. Yet, a nagging feeling that something was wrong never left them. Almost a month passed. Manuel visited her often, but not as often as her future mother-in-law. One could say that she had completely moved in with Nora. Occasionally, she would cook lunch, but more often, she simply relaxed and almost never washed her own dishes. Nora didn't pay much attention to it. In fact, she didn't pay attention to anything because her mind was occupied with completely different, rather unpleasant thoughts. Nora had recently found out that she was pregnant. She had only learned about it a few days ago, and after some calculations, she realized that Manuel couldn't be the father. She breathed a sigh of relief. Honestly, she didn't want children with Manuel. However, she immediately panicked. What should I do now? In 2 weeks, the wedding was scheduled. A wedding with Manuel, but the child inside her was Pedro's. Nora didn't know what to do. She didn't really want to be a single mother. Of course, these weren't ancient times, but it would still be tough for the child. If she canceled the wedding in the hope that Pedro would come later and accept his child, she could embarrass herself completely. Nora didn't sleep for several nights, but then she decided to tell Manuel everything. She couldn't just lie to him like this. Lazy he might be, but he was still a human being. They managed to talk only right before the wedding. Estefania kept a close eye on them, living by the principle of where they are, she is, and constantly tried to teach them something. Manuel, I need to talk to you. Let's talk. He came home from work and lay in front of the TV. It's a very serious conversation. Manuel turned off the TV and sat on the couch. What happened? Well, Nora sighed. You see, before I met you, I was dating someone else. We broke up. Then you came, and now the wedding is approaching. Everything was so whirlwind, but a few days ago. Manuel tensed up. What? Did he come back? No. It's even worse. I don't understand. What could be worse? Worse for you. In short, Manuel, I'm pregnant. It's not your child, but I definitely won't have an abortion. Nora blurted it all out in one breath and closed her eyes, relieved by how much easier it felt. Manuel remained silent. She opened her eyes. He sat there in silence, his hands hanging limply. Nora, how did this happen? What should we do now? I don't know, Manuel. I've told you everything. The decision is entirely up to you. She left the room, and then she heard the front door slam shut. Apparently, Manuel had left. Nora sighed. Well, if he decides to cancel the wedding, so be it. But something told her he wouldn't. Manuel returned the next day. Nora, my mother and I talked. Talked? Who? Nora thought she might faint from this confession. To my mother, of course. You didn't want to lie to her, did you? No, but I thought this was our business for now. Well, not exactly. She'll think that. Well, in short, she'll think it's her own grandchild. Nora sighed. Maybe he was right, but it all felt so distasteful. It was as if she had soiled herself. So, what did you and your mother decide? We decided that you didn't leave us much choice. Again, it didn't sound quite right, but Nora just couldn't figure out what to say. Nora, let's just not talk about it and move on. Who knows what lies ahead for us? Manuel, what are you talking about? I'm about, it's just that life is so unpredictable. It seemed like they had resolved everything, but Nora couldn't shake the unpleasant feelings left by this conversation. They decided not to have a big wedding, and Estefania supported them in this decision. That's right. No need to waste money. It's better to buy something. Nora chuckled. Money? Considering that Nora was the one mostly spending on the wedding, hearing this was funny. Of course, Nora didn't envision her wedding day this way at all. The wedding left the impression that they had simply followed tradition. Nora went back to work, and Manuel took some time off. He said he was tired, and also, after the wedding, they were entitled to some time off. Nora already understood that Manuel was not particularly motivated to work hard. When Nora reached 3 months of pregnancy, she started experiencing intense nausea that seemed to turn her insides out. No matter what she did or what remedies she tried, she felt constantly sick. She had even consulted her textbooks, but found no solution. She understood that morning sickness was normal, but something about it didn't sit right with her. Manuel, I need to go to the city for 2 days tomorrow. He tore his eyes away from the TV. Why? I need to have all the necessary examinations done and get registered for prenatal care. Oh, okay, sure. And he returned his attention to the television. Nora sighed. It felt the same whether she was single or married. Can't you register for prenatal care on your own? Nora laughed. No, Estefania, I can't. I could even get punished for it. It used to be so much easier in the old days. Got pregnant, gave birth, and that's it. But now, so many tests and nonsense. They're all harmful to the baby. Nora appreciated that someone cared about the baby. Of course, you couldn't force Manuel to love another man's child, but couldn't he at least inquire about her well-being from time to time? With 2 days in the city, the nausea had almost completely subsided. Nora couldn't understand it. The doctor just shrugged. Look for the problem at home. Maybe it's the food. Maybe it's the rural milk. You see, you can try to find the cause of your nausea, but we'll only know when you give birth. Nora understood this too well. What could she do? She couldn't keep going to the city all the time. So, she decided to endure it, thinking that time would eventually make the nausea go away. However, she decided to stick to a strict diet and avoid anything that could trigger it. She returned home, and her mother-in-law questioned her thoroughly about the tests, what was normal and what wasn't. Only then did she allow Nora to rest. Nora initially wanted to go to her room, but then she decided to lie down on the veranda. It was cooler there, and the air was fresher. She had already started drifting off when she heard Manuel and his mother enter the kitchen. His mother was scolding him, and Nora wanted to pull the pillow over her ears, but she realized they were talking about her. Manuel, you didn't bring the herbs again? Mom, I didn't have time. Seriously. There's so much work. Work. Well, of course, work is more important. Did you hear that that scoundrel has returned? What scoundrel? What do you mean, what scoundrel? Pedro, the one Nora was having her little flirtation with. Manuel fell silent for a while. How do you know she was having a flirtation with him? Everyone knows except you. Well, he's back now. What's the big deal? Nora is married now. Oh, my God, I've given birth to a complete fool. Do you want me to tell you what might happen? Well, go ahead. Here's what. Nora felt physically as though it was becoming difficult to breathe. Pedro had returned. It was like a nightmare, but she could hardly breathe. She understood that Manuel's mother had brought him to the kitchen for a reason. Her room was too far away, and she wasn't supposed to know about their conversation. What's more, what herbs were they talking about? Nora can light up with honesty. After all, she already told you that she's pregnant, but not with your child. Many would have kept quiet about it, and you would have ended up raising someone else's baby. Now, imagine if she tells this guy that he's about to become a father. Who knows how he'll react? But clearly, we won't gain anything from this. The first option is that he'll tell Nora that since it's their child, they should be together. The second option is that he'll reject her, but when the child is born, he'll start demanding money. You understand? Mom, why did you assume she would tell him anything? And why are you so convinced that everything will turn out so badly? Because, my son, I've lived a long life. Besides, I really don't want to go back to our old home. Your pitiful salary and buckets catching rainwater. I don't understand where you're going with this. Am I supposed to hang around Nora now to make sure she doesn't talk to him? You don't need to be around her all the time. Just get off your backside and fetch the herbs. If you give her a bit more than usual, it won't just make her nauseous. Everything should be fine. Then, if she doesn't terminate it, in a couple of weeks, we'll be rid of this child. And nothing and no one, my dear son, will stand in the way of us enjoying our lives. Nora bit into the edge of her pillow to stifle her scream. Did she just hear her mother-in-law plotting against her unborn child? What was she supposed to do now? Run to the police? But what evidence did Nora have? Who would stand up for her? Something told Nora that if she confronted them now and told them to leave, they wouldn't just pack their things. But what would happen to her was less clear. She heard a truck leaving the house, which meant Manuel had gone for the herbs. She needed to get away from there and seek help from someone. She quietly slipped off the porch and quickly made her way to Pedro's house. She didn't understand why, although she did. If anyone could protect her, it was him. But she would have to tell him everything, absolutely everything. She crouched down by the gate, peeked out, and didn't see anyone noticing her. She took a deep breath. Who are we hiding from? Nora jumped. She would recognize that voice anywhere. Pedro, hello. I need to talk to you. And won't your husband scold you for that? Nora couldn't hold back any longer. At first, she just cried, but then she started having the full-blown panic attack. Pedro looked at her, frightened. Nora, what? Is he hurting you? I'll crush him into dust. No, he's not. Then what? Come on, let's go inside. He took Nora's arm and led her quickly inside. Liana gasped. Nora, dear, what's happened to you? Wait, let me give you some water. While Nora sipped the water, shivering, Pedro and his mother watched her closely. Nora placed the glass down, feeling a bit calmer, and took a deep breath. There's something I need to tell you. Pedro sat down in front of her on a chair. Well, go ahead. I don't think this story will be too exciting, but spill it. Nora missed the moment when Pedro put on his mask again. But she didn't care. He could behave however he wanted as long as he helped her. She sighed deeply. I'm pregnant. Pedro grinned. Very valuable information. Nora sighed again. Not by my husband. It's your child, Pedro. He stood up, then sat back down. Nora, why tell me this? It would be one thing if you weren't married, but why lie now? I'm not lying, but I didn't come to tell you about the pregnancy. I told Manuel about it just before the wedding, that I was expecting a child and that it wasn't his. He and his mother discussed what to do, but they decided to let it be. I calmed down, relaxed, and thought that you would never know about the child. Pedro clenched his fists but remained silent. Liana moved closer to Nora, patting her hand. Don't worry. Go on, tell us. Nora felt somewhat calmer now and continued. After she finished her story, Liana said, Those wretches. Her grandmother was an herbalist. It seems she inherited some knowledge. But they want to destroy a living soul. Pedro stood up. No, Mom, not just a living soul. They want to destroy my child. Nora raised her head. Pedro, I don't want anything from you. I won't ask you for anything. Just help me. I don't know what to do. I'm just scared to go back home. Well, we can talk about what happens next later. Right now, we need to think about something else. The situation is very delicate. As you understand, just like that, especially since the test showed nothing, we won't be able to prove anything. What's most important now? Liana stood up. The most important thing is not to endanger the child's life and Nora's, and we should leave all these disputes for later. That's also true, but we can't let them get away with it either. You understand that what they're doing is a real crime. I understand, Pedro, but I won't let Nora go there. Mom, just go and get Sancho. Liana blushed. Sancho had recently moved to their village. He had served in the police, and after retiring, he bought a small house in the village while leaving his city apartment to his son, who had also followed in his footsteps. Liana and Sancho had developed a friendly relationship and later a romantic one. They had tried to keep it a secret, although Sancho didn't understand why. Why should I go call him? You should go and get him. He's your neighbor too. Mom, please, just go. He'll understand you better. Liana wanted to say something more but changed her mind and rushed out the door. Pedro moved closer to Nora, taking her hands in his. Nora, do you hear me? Don't be afraid. No one will harm your child. Nora, despite her distressed feelings, noticed that Pedro had said your instead of our. Well, that was fine with her. She didn't care. The most important thing was that no one threatened her little girl. Nora was sure that she would give birth to a daughter. After about 15 minutes, Liana returned, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man. Nora had to recount her story once again. I can't believe it. I thought this sort of thing couldn't happen in the village. So, you mean to say that they could do this because of a house and money? As I understand it, the child has nothing to do with it. It's the house that's at stake here. Pedro shrugged. It seems so. Herbs, you say? In reality, it's not that hard to find out what they're giving her. We just need the authority. You stay here while I call my son. Pedro also stood up. But how? We don't know anything. We only have Nora's word for it. Sancho smiled. A good investigator can find everything, and that herbs will definitely leave its mark either in the car, at home, or in that old house. He turned to Nora. You, dear, lie down, rest, or even better, take a nap. This will take a while, and you need to relax. And don't go outside. All of you. God forbid they suspect something, we won't find anything. Nora gladly lay down on Pedro's bed. Everything in the room smelled like him. It felt pleasantly nerve-wracking. Pedro peeked in on her a couple of times, but Nora was sleeping soundly. She understood that she was being treated differently in this house. She was awakened by voices, and then the room lit up. Pedro was standing in the doorway, smiling. You must really like sleeping. Wake up. You need to give your statement. Your relatives have been taken already. Nora sat up abruptly. How? Just like that. Manuel came home, and his mother was already waiting. She said you were missing. They started searching all around the house, but completely forgot about what they left in the car. Sancho says that this grass might look harmless, but in skilled hands, it can turn into real poison. Nora, please bear with it and answer their questions. Okay. Pedro? What? Is there anything to eat? I'm eating like there's no tomorrow now, and I haven't had anything since this morning. He looked at her, then burst out laughing. Of course. We'll feed you, both of you. 15 minutes later, Nora was munching on a big sandwich with coffee and answering questions. For now, she had declined any heavier food so as not to embarrass the officers in uniform, but she was already picturing herself slurping a bowl of cabbage soup that Liana was currently preparing. She recounted her story once more, answered several questions, and then the police officers left. After a hearty dinner, she felt the drowsiness creep back in. I probably need to go home. Now that I'm not nauseous, I'm hungry all the time and sleepy. Liana chuckled. That's normal, dear. Eat and sleep. You can stay here tonight. You can go home tomorrow. Pedro nodded in agreement. Nora happily sprawled out on his bed again. She'd sleep wherever she wanted. If there was nowhere else, she'd even move over, as long as it didn't disturb her sleep. Pedro actually came to her. He lay down fully clothed, embraced her, and they fell asleep. How good it felt to be in his arms. She didn't even have to think about it, she just fell asleep. In the morning, she woke up, and he was gone. She walked into the room where Liana sat looking distressed. Where's Pedro? He left. Left again. Like a tumbleweed, honestly. How did he leave? Like this. He left a note that said, I need to figure myself out. Either work attracts him, or romance and all that, or he's just been a fool since birth. Nora slumped into a chair, feeling drained. She had thought that everything would be different now, but Pedro had left again. She got up. I should go, Liana. I have to get to work soon. How are you feeling? Nora smiled. Very well, actually. Take this with you to work. I made buns and cutlets. Oh, no, you don't have to. You need it. And remember, if my son's a fool, you have me. Got it? I won't abandon you. Nora sadly smiled and left the house. Liana watched her go, thinking, poor girl. She's been through so much. Time passed unnoticed. Nora was only summoned to the police station once and then to court. Liana and Sancho accompanied her. Recently, she had felt like she had acquired new parents. Whether it was Liana or Sancho, they both doted on her, trying to feed her constantly, taking care of her, and inviting her over. Nora didn't resist. It was all very comforting. There was still no news from Pedro. She had given up waiting for him. There was so much to do. She felt unwell during the trial. When Manuel and his mother started yelling at each other, and at her too, Nora's vision blurred. The trial had already been going on for a while, and it was ending without her. She had called for an ambulance in advance. As soon as the first contraction started, she knew that by the time they arrived, and with her being in labor for the first time, they brought her to a room with two other women. There was still some time, and though the environment and the pain in her abdomen were not conducive to conversation, they managed to introduce themselves. One woman was having her third child, and the other, just like Nora, was having her first. The labor went well. An exhausted Nora reclined on the cot, and the doctor said, "Look at this, all from the same room, all girls. And here we have a little princess." Nora smiled. She drifted off to sleep, thinking that her princess would be the most special one. The first to be discharged was the woman who had given birth to her third child. "Well, ladies, good luck to you. I've had enough, but I wish each of you another round, at least one." Nora laughed. "Oh, give me some time to recover from this round." Liana called the maternity ward every day and had already visited twice. She was so thrilled that Nora almost cried. "So, my princess, are you coming home tomorrow?" The little one wrinkled her nose, and Nora laughed. Tomorrow, Liana and Sancho would come to pick her up. The weather seemed to have heard that a happy mom was being discharged from the maternity ward. Heavy rains had poured for about 10 days, but today, the sun was shining brightly. "Look at this weather." Nora was packing her things. "Nora, they've come for you." She smiled and turned to her neighbor. "Well, that's it for now. Good luck to you." Her neighbor hugged her. "Good luck to you too. And your Pedro will surely come to his senses." Yesterday, before her discharge, lying in the dark, they had opened up to each other. Nora told her story, and the woman in the neighboring bed told hers. It turned out her man had disappeared as soon as he found out she was pregnant. "What about you?" "Oh, Nora, everything's fine. My mom and dad turned out to be the best. They won't abandon me. I used to hurt them so much." The nurse took the little girl, and Nora hugged her neighbor once more. "Make sure to come visit me. The baby needs fresh air. I have a huge house, so take your parents with you." She followed the nurse to the exit. Just a little more, and she'd finally be home. The doors opened, and Nora froze. Pedro was standing right in front of her. He was in a suit, and she had never seen him like this before, so she could hardly recognize him. The nurse carried her daughter out, and Pedro rushed towards her. The nurse asked sternly, "Are you the father?" He nodded in confusion. "Yes." The nurse smiled broadly. "Well, take your beauty." Pedro gently took the bundle, peeked inside, and looked at Nora. "She's so tiny." Nora wanted to hit him. Her mood instantly soured. "What are you doing here?" "What do you mean?" "I'm here to welcome you and our daughter from the maternity ward." "You didn't need to. We were perfectly fine on our own. And then you'll probably have the urge to leave, as usual." Nora glared at him, and Pedro looked at her, bewildered. "Nora, forgive me. I'll never leave again." "I don't believe you." She took the baby from his arms and descended the stairs. Pedro followed her, chasing after her. "Nora, forgive me, such a fool. Marry me." Nora stopped in her tracks. She so badly wanted to shout, "Yes. Yes, I agree." But she held back. "I'll think about it." As they approached the car, Sancho and Liana hurried toward them. Nora, our dear. Liana hugged her, and tears welled up in Nora's eyes. Dear. How long had it been since she had heard someone call her that? They all got into the car, with Pedro at the wheel. As the car started moving, Nora noticed how carefully he avoided all the potholes, driving as if he were carrying crystal. She smiled faintly, and Liana leaned in close to her ear and whispered, "That's right, Nora. Even though this idiot is my only and beloved son, you must make him understand how wrong he is." And she sat down as if nothing had happened. Nora chuckled softly. It seemed like this time she had hit the jackpot with her mother-in-law. Such a dreamlike situation. This time, the wedding was exactly as Nora had always dreamed: a lavish dress, a sea of guests filling her large house, gifts, wine, and cries of "so let them kiss." She agreed to marry Pedro in 3 months. He had lost a lot of weight, only his eyes and nose remained. Every day after work, he would visit her. He bought all the toys available at the store. Nora couldn't believe it when he came home, joyfully presenting her with a large coloring book, showing it to Alba, and saying, "As soon as you grow up a little, we'll color in this together. Pedro, this book will have to sit here for at least 3 more years." He looked at her puzzled. "So what? At least we'll already have it, and then we can buy another one later." She sighed at that. "What am I going to do with you? You'll buy the whole house full of nonsense. I'll have to keep an eye on you. Nora, is that a yes?" "Yes." He picked her up, spun her around, shouted something, and then set her down, saying, "You're going to be the happiest woman. I promise you that."
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.